I was tucking my 8-year-old foster daughter into bed when she asked, "Am I going back to the bad place?" "What bad place, sweetie?" I sat on the edge of her bed, confused. "Never mind." She turned away and pulled her stuffed rabbit close. That's when I noticed the scars on her forearms as her pajama sleeves rode up. "Ava, how did you get these scars?" She pulled away from me quickly. "Just playing at school." My stomach tightened because after 3 years of fostering, I knew that look. "Ava, you can tell me anything. Are you hurting yourself?" "No." "Can I go to bed now?" She practically ran from my reach, clutching her rabbit. Before I could follow, my phone buzzed with a text from my other foster son, Terry. "Is Ava okay?" She was crying in the bathroom earlier. "Do you know why she was crying?" "No, but she's been acting weird. Like really sad all the time." The next morning, the school nurse called while I was at work. "Mrs. Anderson, I need to discuss Ava's injuries. She has scarring on her arms and what looks like scratches on her legs." My mouth went dry. She said it was from playing. She told me they happened at home. I'm required to document this. The threat hit me like ice water. They thought I was hurting her. "I'll need to file a report with Child Services. Someone will be contacting you within 72 hours. After hanging up, I sat in my car shaking. 3 foster kids under my roof, and now I was being investigated. They could take all of them away. That night, I watched everyone like a hawk. Terry was doing homework. My youngest foster daughter, Kia, was coloring. Normal evening, except Ava kept nodding off at dinner. "Didn't you sleep well?" I asked. "I had weird dreams," she mumbled into her mac and cheese. "What kind of dreams?" She shrugged and asked to be excused. 2 days until the home visit. Terry pulled me aside that night. "Something's up with Ava's window." I followed him to her room where she was already asleep at 7 p.m. The window lock was loose and there were tiny scratches on the sill. My blood went cold. I installed a baby monitor app on my phone without telling her. That night at 11 p.m. I checked and she was in bed. But when my alarm went off at 3 a.m. for the bathroom, I checked again. The bed was empty. I ran to her room and she was there, sound asleep, but her pajamas were different. The pink ones I'd put her in were replaced with purple ones. The social worker called to confirm tomorrow's visit. "We take these reports seriously, Mrs. Anderson. 3 children's safety is at stake." That morning, Ava drew a picture during breakfast. A yellow house with a broken swing set and a woman with long black hair. "That's pretty. Is it from a book?" "It's a special house," she said dreamily. "From my dreams." Something clicked wrong in my chest. I'd seen that house. It was 4 miles away in a rougher part of town during a driving shortcut. But Ava had never been there. What happens at the special house? The lady gives me cookies and braids my hair. She touched her head where I'd found the pine needles. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I heard the smallest sound and crept to Ava's door. It was cracked open. Her bed was empty. I threw on shoes and ran outside just in time to see a small figure in pink pajamas climbing our back fence. My heart hammered as I followed at a distance. Ava walked with purpose, a tiny, determined figure under streetlights. By the time we reached the yellow house with its broken swing, my feet were soaked from dew and my mind was reeling. The door opened and a woman pulled her into a hug. Long black hair, thin frame, shaking hands. I knew that face from the file. Ava's bio mom, Claudia, who'd lost custody 2 years ago for neglect and substance abuse. Through the window, I watched Claudia heat up soup and braid Ava's hair, while Ava talked with more joy than I'd ever heard before. Claudia kept touching Ava's face like she couldn't believe she was real. Then I heard Claudia say, "The courts can't stop us meeting at night, baby. Darkness keeps us safe. Our little secret." It was now 4 a.m. Ava's bio mom had been making her walk 4 miles through darkness alone. The next morning, Child Services arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Ava was barely awake on the couch. The social worker examined her arms and started asking questions when I stopped her. That's when the social worker said something that changed everything. Claudia hadn't just lost custody for neglect and substance abuse. There was another reason. A reason that made those 4-mile walks through darkness even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Cecilia Klein pulled out a folder and opened it on the coffee table between us. A registered sex offender named Wesley Lockhart has been living at that yellow house for 18 months. My hands went cold. Every single one of those nighttime visits meant Claudia brought Ava to a house where a sex offender lived. Cecilia kept talking, but her words sounded underwater. Claudia violated a no-contact order every time she had Ava there. The court specifically said Ava couldn't be anywhere near Lockhart. My stomach dropped hard. 4 miles through darkness alone to a house with a predator. I'd been sleeping while my foster daughter walked straight into danger I didn't even know existed. Cecilia closed the folder and looked at me directly. "We need an emergency safety plan right now. Window alarms on every opening in Ava's room. Direct 911 protocols if any contact happens. Documentation of every single concerning behavior from here forward." She pulled out forms and started writing. I watched her pen move across the paper and thought about how many nights this had been happening. How many times Ava climbed that fence while I slept. How close she came to something terrible. Cecilia handed me a list of alarm systems I could buy today. She said I needed them installed before Ava got home from the school. Then she stood up and told me someone would check on the installation tomorrow. After she left, I sat on the couch staring at that list until my vision blurred. I drove to 3 different stores that afternoon looking for the right window alarms. My hands shook when I paid for them. The clerk asked if I was okay and I said I was fine. Back home, I opened Ava's bedroom window and stuck the first sensor on the frame. The adhesive felt flimsy under my fingers. I tested it and a sharp chirp filled the room. Each window got 2 sensors because I couldn't trust just one. The bathroom window, the window in the hallway near her room, even the small window in the laundry room she could theoretically reach. Every chirping test felt like proof I'd failed before. These alarms were protection, but they were also evidence that I hadn't kept her safe when it mattered. I finished the last sensor and checked my phone. Ava's bus would arrive in 20 minutes. I washed my hands 3 times trying to stop them from shaking. The house felt different now. Smaller. Like the walls couldn't actually keep danger out the way I'd believed they could. Ava walked through the front door and dropped her backpack in the hallway. She headed toward her room and I heard her footsteps stop. When I got to her doorway, she was standing completely still, staring at the window. The white sensors stood out against the dark frame. She turned and looked at me and her face went pale. She knew exactly what they meant. Her nighttime escapes were over. At dinner, she pushed mac and cheese around her plate without eating. Terry tried to talk to her about his science project, but she didn't respond. Kia asked her about school and got nothing. I asked if she wanted more milk and she shook her head. The silence at the table felt heavy and wrong. After 20 minutes, Ava asked to be excused. She walked to her room without looking back. I found her an hour later already in bed with the lights off. Usually she asked for a story. Usually she wanted me to sit with her until she fell asleep. Tonight her back was turned to the door and she didn't move when I said goodnight. I pulled her door almost closed and stood in the hallway listening to nothing. That night after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop and started a document. I titled it Ava Safety Documentation and began typing. October 15th, noticed scars on forearms when pajama sleeves rode up. October 16th, school nurse called about injuries, said Ava claimed they happened at home. October 18th, Terry reported Ava crying in bathroom. October 19th, found window lock loose with scratches on sill. I kept going. October 20th, baby monitor showed empty bed at 3 a.m. Ava returned in different pajamas. October 21st, Ava drew picture of yellow house she'd never been to. October 22nd, followed Ava on nighttime walk to Claudia's house 4 miles away. Each entry felt like building a case, but also like admitting how blind I'd been. The scars weren't from playing at the school. The sleepiness wasn't just weird dreams. The changed pajamas weren't my imagination. Every sign had been there and I'd missed them or explained them away. I saved the document and checked the time. 2 in the morning. I should sleep, but I kept thinking about those 4 miles of darkness and what could have happened on any of those walks. I added one more entry. October 23rd, learned Wesley Lockhart lives at Yellow House where nighttime visits occurred. The next morning I called the school before Ava's bus arrived. Rachel Walton answered on the second ring. I need to meet with you about Ava's safety plan. She said she had time during lunch. I arrived at 11:30 and she led me to a small office near the nurse's station. We sat across from each other and I explained everything. The nighttime walks, the sex offender at the house, the window alarms I'd installed. Rachel took notes the whole time. She said she'd document Ava's daytime fatigue and any physical concerns in official medical records. Having the school as an ally instead of an accuser felt like solid ground under my feet for the first time in days. She asked what else she could do to help. I said just keep watching and let me know if anything seems off. She walked me to the front entrance and told me I was doing the right thing. I believed her because I needed to believe someone thought I wasn't completely failing at this. That evening I sat down with Terry at the kitchen table while Kia colored in the living room. Ava needs extra support right now. Terry nodded but looked worried. I told him that when he's worried about something, telling me is always the right choice. He looked relieved, like he'd been carrying weight he didn't know what to do with. You did the right thing texting me about Ava. His shoulders relaxed. I made sure he understood that none of this was his responsibility to fix. He was just a kid too, and he didn't need to take care of anyone but himself. We sat there for a minute and then he asked if Ava was going to be okay. I told him I was doing everything I could to keep her safe. He seemed to accept that and went back to his homework. I watched him write equations and thought about how this whole situation had affected everyone in the house, not just Ava. Kia appeared in the doorway holding her picture. She asked why Ava seems sad all the time. I kept my answer simple because she was only 6. Sometimes people we love make choices that aren't safe and we have to help keep everyone protected. She thought about that for a second. Is Ava protected now? I told her yes. We were all working to keep Ava safe. She accepted this with the straightforward logic of a child and went back to coloring her picture of our family. I looked at the drawing later. She'd made all of us holding hands with big smiles. The simplicity of it broke something in my chest. She could still see our family as happy and safe while I felt like everything was falling apart. That night, after everyone was in bed, I opened my email and attached the baby monitor screenshots to a message for Cecilia Klein. The images showed Ava's empty bed at 3 a.m. and her return in different pajamas. I attached my written statement about following her to the Yellow House. I attached photos of the scars on her arms. I attached the drawing she'd made of the Yellow House. Every piece of evidence felt like building a real case for Ava's safety instead of just defending myself against accusations that I'd hurt her. I hit send and watched the message disappear. Having concrete proof documented made me feel less alone. This wasn't just my word against Claudia's anymore. This was evidence that could actually protect Ava through official channels. The window alarm chirped at exactly 1:40 a.m., and I was at Ava's door in seconds. She stood by the window with tears streaming down her face. Her hand was on the sensor like she'd been trying to figure out how to remove it. I sat down on her bed. She didn't move. I just want to see my mom. Her voice cracked on the last word. I told her I understood she loved her mother. I told her those feelings were okay and normal, but the nighttime walks had to stop because they weren't safe. She turned and looked at me with so much pain in her 8-year-old face. You don't understand anything. Maybe I didn't understand everything, but I understood that a sex offender lived in that house. I understood that 4 miles alone in darkness could end in ways I couldn't let myself imagine. I told her we'd find safe ways for her to see her mother. Real visits with people watching to make sure everyone stayed protected. But sneaking out at night to that house wasn't one of those ways. She stood there crying and I stayed on the bed. After a long time, she climbed under her covers and turned away from me. I sat with her until her breathing changed to sleep. Then I went back to my room and lay awake until morning, thinking about how much an 8-year-old could hurt and how little I could do to fix it. The next morning, I woke up with my phone in my hand and Ava's screams still echoing in my head. I called Cecilia Klein at 8:30 before I could second-guess myself. I told her I wanted to support supervised visits between Ava and Claudia, if that could be arranged through the court system properly. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Cecilia was quiet for a second, and then she said she appreciated my willingness to help them stay connected, instead of trying to cut Claudia out completely. She explained the process would take time and needed Claudia's cooperation, but that my position would help the case move forward. Then her tone shifted and she warned me that any contact between Ava and Claudia outside official channels could wreck the entire case. She said if I couldn't keep Ava safe enough, they might have to move her to a different placement for her own protection. The words hit me in the chest like something physical and cold. I gripped the phone tighter and promised I understood the rules. I gave her the exact address of the yellow house with the broken swing set, and she said she'd forward it to law enforcement right away for documentation of the violation. Knowing that official people were actually going to do something made me feel less alone in trying to protect Ava from danger she was too young to understand. We hung up and I sat at my kitchen table staring at my coffee. Terry came downstairs ready for school and asked if I was okay. I told him yes and made him breakfast like it was a normal morning. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as Tyler Shields and said he was a detective who worked on child safety cases. His voice was calm and professional like he did this every day. He asked if I could come to the station to give a formal statement about what I saw during Ava's nighttime walk. I scheduled it for the next morning and spent the rest of the day feeling like things were finally moving through proper channels, instead of just me trying to handle everything alone. The interview at the police station happened in a small room with a recording device on the table. Detective Shields had kind eyes and took notes while I described following Ava through the dark streets to the yellow house. He confirmed that Wesley Lockhart was registered at that address, and that a protection order said Claudia couldn't have Ava anywhere near where Lockhart lived. The legal violations were documented and clear, which meant law enforcement could actually step in and do something. Detective Shields explained that Claudia obviously wanted to see her daughter, but she'd put Ava in danger over and over by bringing her to a house with a registered offender. He said that pattern had to stop right now. Hearing him say Claudia's feelings were real, but her choices were wrong, helped me understand how to think about the whole situation, without feeling like I had to pick a side. He walked me out and shook my hand and told me I did the right thing reporting everything. That evening, Cecilia Klein called again and told me CPS was asking for an emergency court hearing to deal with the safety violations and figure out what should happen next with Ava's placement and any contact with Claudia. She said I'd need to testify about what I witnessed. The thought scared me, but I knew it was necessary to keep Ava protected. I agreed, and she said she'd send me the court date and time. The next morning, I went outside to check the mail and found a folded piece of paper wedged into our back fence. My hand started shaking when I opened it and read the words written in messy handwriting. "You stole my daughter and you'll pay for keeping us apart." I took 3 photos of the note from different angles and called Detective Shields right away. He told me to put the note in a plastic bag and not touch it anymore, and that he'd document it as possible witness intimidation. After I hung up, I stood in my backyard looking at the fence and feeling exposed like someone was watching. I walked next door and knocked on Max Rollins' door. He answered in his work clothes getting ready to leave, and I asked if he'd be willing to point his security camera toward our backyard fence. I explained we were dealing with some safety concerns, and he said yes immediately without asking for details. He adjusted the camera angle right then while I watched and told me he'd keep an eye on the footage. Having someone else watching our property made me feel slightly less like we were sitting ducks waiting for something bad to happen. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making breakfast. Rachel Walton from the school told me Ava had fallen asleep during reading time again, and the counselor wanted to flag her for extra support services. I stood at the stove flipping pancakes and asked what kind of support they were thinking about. Rachel explained they could set up check-ins with the counselor and maybe adjust her schedule to include more movement breaks during the day. I agreed and asked if we could also work on a bedtime routine plan since the nighttime walks had stopped, but Ava was still adjusting to actually sleeping through the night. Rachel said she'd coordinate with the counselor and send me some resources about sleep schedules for kids. After we hung up, I felt relieved that the school was working with me instead of just documenting problems. I finished breakfast and got all 3 kids fed and out the door on time. Later that afternoon, I was putting away clean laundry in Ava's room when I lifted her mattress to tuck in the fitted sheet. A folded piece of paper slid out onto the floor. I picked it up and unfolded it to find a hand-drawn map showing the route from our house to the yellow house. Ava had labeled landmarks in her careful printing. Our street, the corner store, the park with the broken fountain, the empty lot with the chain-link fence, the yellow house. My chest felt tight looking at how much planning she'd put into those walks. She'd drawn little stars at spots where she could hide if she saw a car. She'd marked a house with a dog that barked. Every detail showed she'd been thinking about this route over and over. I took 3 photos of the map from different angles and added it to my documentation folder. Then I put the map in a plastic bag and stored it with the other evidence. That evening, Terry came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and asked if he could talk to me. I dried my hands and sat down at the table with him. He looked nervous and kept picking at a spot on his jeans. Finally, he told me he saw Ava outside one night about 3 weeks ago, but was too scared to tell me because he thought he'd get in trouble for being awake. I reached over and put my hand on his arm and told him he wasn't in trouble at all. I explained that telling me now was exactly the right thing to do, even though it was hard. I asked him what night it was and what he saw. Terry said he'd gotten up to use the bathroom around midnight and looked out the window. He saw Ava climbing over the back fence. He watched until she disappeared down the street and then he went back to bed. He said he felt bad about not saying anything, but he didn't know if it was real or if he was dreaming. I hugged him and thanked him for being brave enough to tell me. Then I asked if he'd seen anything else unusual, and he shook his head. After he went to do homework, I added his statement to my documentation log with the date and time he remembered. The next morning, Cecilia Klein arrived at 8:30 for the home walkthrough. I'd gotten everyone up early and made sure the kitchen was clean and breakfast was on the table. Cecilia walked through every room checking the window alarms. She tested each sensor by opening the window slightly until it chirped. In Ava's room, she examined the scratches on the windowsill and took photos with her phone. Then she sat at the kitchen table and reviewed my documentation logs while the kids ate cereal and toast. She flipped through pages of my handwritten notes about Ava's sleep patterns, the changed pajamas, the pine needles, the baby monitor screenshots. She asked questions about our morning routine and how I handled discipline. I showed her the chore chart on the fridge and explained how we did homework time after dinner. Cecilia watched Terry help Kia pour milk and observed how Ava sat quietly eating without much energy. After about an hour, Cecilia closed her notebook and told me she was noting my cooperation and the stability of the home in her report. She said it was clear I was taking this seriously and working hard to keep everyone safe. When she left, I felt like maybe I'd passed some kind of test. That afternoon, my phone rang with the school's number. The office secretary's voice was shaking when she told me Claudia had just tried to sign Ava out for a dental appointment that wasn't on any list. My hands went cold holding the phone. The secretary explained they'd refused and asked to see documentation. Claudia got angry and started yelling that she had a right to see her daughter. The secretary called CPS and the police while Claudia was still in the office. By the time officers arrived, Claudia had left without Ava. The secretary wanted to confirm that Ava was safe and that no one was authorized to pick her up except me. I thanked her for following protocol and told her she did exactly the right thing. After hanging up, I sat down because my legs felt weak. Claudia was getting more desperate, and that made her more dangerous. Within an hour, Detective Shields called my cell. He told me the attempted school pickup had been documented, and he'd issued Claudia a formal warning about breaking custody orders and the protection order. He explained that if she tried anything like this again, she could face criminal charges. Each time someone official stepped in to protect Ava, I felt a little safer. But I also knew Claudia's need to see her daughter was only getting stronger. Detective Shields asked if there had been any other contact attempts, and I told him about the note on the fence and Max's security camera. He said to keep documenting everything and call immediately if anything else happened. The next day, I called 3 different therapy offices trying to find someone who specialized in foster kids. The first 2 had waiting lists of over a month. The third office connected me with Elena Mack, who worked with children dealing with loyalty conflicts and attachment problems. Her voice was calm and warm when she explained her approach. She had an opening in 3 days and could see Ava twice a week if needed. I scheduled the first appointment and felt like I was finally building something solid instead of just reacting to each crisis. Having professional help lined up made the whole situation feel more manageable. 3 days later, I drove Ava to Elena's office in a small building near the community center. The waiting room had soft chairs and toys in the corner. Elena came out to meet us, and she had kind eyes and long brown hair pulled back in a braid. She asked Ava if she wanted to come see her office, and Ava nodded without saying anything. I waited in the lobby for 40 minutes reading old magazines. When they came out, Elena walked Ava to me and told her she did a good job today. After Ava went to look at the toys, Elena pulled me aside. She said the session was brief, and Ava mostly drew pictures and gave one-word answers. But she didn't refuse to be there, and she didn't shut down completely. Elena explained that building trust would take time, and the most important thing was showing up consistently. So Ava learned therapy was a safe space. I scheduled the next appointment for 3 days later. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as Danny Herrera, and explained he was a guardian ad litem appointed by the court to represent Ava's best interests. He needed to schedule interviews with me, Ava, and her teachers to understand the full situation. His job was to figure out what was truly best for Ava and make recommendations to the judge. I felt both relieved and scared. Relieved because someone was focused only on what Ava needed. Scared because I didn't know what he would decide. We scheduled a home visit for the following week, and he said he'd also visit the school and talk to Ava separately. After hanging up, I realized how many people were now involved in our lives. CPS workers, detectives, therapists, lawyers, court appointees. Every day brought new meetings and calls and reports. Danny arrived the following Tuesday at 5:30 during dinner time. I'd made spaghetti and meatballs, and all 3 kids were at the table. Terry was helping Kia cut her meatballs into smaller pieces. Ava sat picking at her food and pushing noodles around her plate. I was moving between the stove and the table serving garlic bread and refilling water cups. Danny sat in the extra chair and just watched for a while. Then he started asking questions about our daily routines. What time did everyone wake up? How did mornings work with 3 kids getting ready? What happened after school? How did I handle it when someone broke a rule? I answered while wiping Kia's face and reminding Terry to finish his vegetables. Danny asked about my approach to discipline, and I explained we used timeouts and loss of privileges but never physical punishment. He wanted to know how I was handling the stress of the investigation and everything with Ava. I admitted it was hard, but that I had support from my sister and a friend from church. Danny took notes on a yellow legal pad and watched how we all interacted. When dinner ended, he thanked me for letting him observe our family and said he'd be in touch after completing his other interviews. The first voicemail came 2 days later while I was making breakfast. I saw Claudia's number and let it go to voicemail. Her voice sounded soft and pleading as she asked me to please understand that she just wanted to be part of Ava's life. She said the courts were being unfair, and that supervised visits weren't enough for a mother and daughter who loved each other. I saved the message and kept cooking eggs for the kids. The second voicemail arrived that afternoon while I was at the grocery store. Claudia's tone had shifted. She said I needed to stop acting like I was Ava's real mother because I wasn't. She accused me of turning Ava against her and said I had no right to interfere in their relationship. Her words stung, but I saved that message too. The third voicemail came late that night after the kids were in bed. Claudia was angry now, her voice rising as she demanded I stop poisoning Ava's mind and let them have their time together. She said I was destroying their bond and that she would find a way to see her daughter no matter what I did. I listened to all 3 messages again, and then forwarded them to Cecilia Klein, with a note explaining the pattern. Cecilia responded within an hour saying she was logging them as potential intimidation and harassment. 3 nights later, I woke to a rustling sound outside Ava's window around midnight. I grabbed my phone and went to her room to find her standing on her bed trying to tie bedsheets together into a rope. Tears streamed down her face, but her jaw was set with determination. I stood in the doorway watching her small hands work the knots. She looked up and saw me, and her face crumpled. I walked over and sat on the floor next to her bed. She climbed down and screamed that I was mean and that her mom needed her. I stayed calm and told her I understood she wanted to see her mother, but she couldn't leave this house alone at night. She yelled that I didn't understand anything and that her mom was waiting for her. I held firm and said she wasn't going anywhere unsupervised no matter how angry she got. She cried and screamed for over an hour while I sat there on the carpet. Eventually, she wore herself out and fell asleep still in her clothes. I carried her to bed and pulled the covers over her. My phone rang at 8 the next morning while I was packing school lunches. Detective Shields said he had concerning news. Wesley Lockhart had been spotted at the Yellow House as recently as 2 days ago by a patrol officer doing a routine check. My stomach dropped as I realized the danger wasn't just about Claudia's poor judgment from the past. This was current and ongoing. An active predator was living in that house right now while Claudia was still trying to bring Ava there. Detective Shields said they were increasing monitoring of the property and that I should continue documenting any contact attempts. I thanked him and hung up feeling sick. Cecilia Klein called that afternoon to schedule an emergency meeting. She said given Ava's continued attempts to reach Claudia, they needed to discuss whether Ava should be moved to a respite placement for her own safety. My heart hammered as I realized they might take her away from us. I asked if we could meet the next day and she agreed. That night I couldn't sleep thinking about how to convince them to let Ava stay. The meeting happened in Cecilia's office the following afternoon. She laid out her concerns about Ava's escape attempts and Claudia's escalating contact. I argued strongly to keep Ava with us. I explained that moving her again would only increase her trauma, and that we could maintain safety with the current protocols if we stayed alert. I showed her my documentation logs and the new security measures. Cecilia listened carefully and said she would take my position into account when making her recommendation. She seemed genuinely thoughtful about what was best for Ava, rather than just following procedures. That evening I was helping Kia with her homework when I noticed Terry's math folder sitting on the table. I opened it and saw red marks on several recent tests. His grades had dropped significantly over the past few weeks. I realized with guilt that I'd been so focused on the Ava crisis that I'd completely neglected to check in properly with him about his own needs. After Kia went to play, I sat with Terry at the kitchen table. I asked him about his math class, and he admitted he was struggling with fractions. We worked through several problems together, and I asked about his life beyond the household drama. He told me about a science project he was excited about, and a friend from the school who wanted him to join soccer. I made a mental note to rebalance my attention across all 3 kids instead of letting everything revolve around Ava's situation. Cecilia called 3 days later with cautiously good news. Claudia had agreed to a supervised visit at a neutral location with a court-appointed monitor present. The visit was scheduled for the following week. Cecilia emphasized this was contingent on Claudia following all rules and demonstrating she could put Ava's safety ahead of her own desires. If Claudia violated any terms, the visits would stop immediately. I felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief that Ava would get to see her mother in a safe way. Worry about whether Claudia could actually follow the rules. That evening, I sat with Ava on her bed and explained that she would get to see her mom next week. I told her a helper would be there to make sure everyone stayed safe. Ava's face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. She asked if she could bring drawings to show her mom, and I said yes. She started planning what pictures she would make and what she wanted to tell Claudia about school. My heart ached watching her excitement. She needed this connection so desperately, even though I understood why it had to be restricted and monitored. The supervised visit took place on Saturday afternoon at a community center 3 miles from our house. I drove Ava there, and we walked into a bland meeting room with gray walls and fluorescent lights. Irene Kelly sat in a corner chair with a clipboard taking notes. Claudia arrived 5 minutes after us and rushed to hug Ava tightly. They sat at a table covered with coloring books and crayons. For the next hour, I watched them color together and talk. Claudia kept touching Ava's face and hair like she couldn't believe she was real. Ava showed her the drawings she'd brought and told stories about her teacher and classmates. I could see genuine maternal warmth in how Claudia listened and responded. But I also noticed her subtle attempts to ask questions about our household routines and what time Ava went to bed. Irene Kelly gently redirected each time, reminding Claudia to focus on their time together right now. When the hour ended, Claudia hugged Ava again and promised to see her again soon. Ava returned from the visit energized but also confused. On the drive home, she asked why it had to be so short and why someone was watching them the whole time. I explained as simply as I could that the rules existed to keep her safe. She said it felt weird having someone write down everything they said. At her next therapy session 2 days later, Elena Mack worked with Ava on understanding why the supervision was necessary. Elena explained that her mom had made choices that weren't safe and that the rules weren't meant to be mean or keep them apart forever. Ava listened, but I could tell she was still struggling with feeling pulled between 2 homes and 2 mothers. Max Rollins called me late one evening about a week after the supervised visit. His security camera had caught footage of someone approaching our back fence around 2 in the morning, though they didn't cross onto our property. I immediately called Detective Shields, and he came by the next morning to review the footage. He confirmed it appeared to be Claudia testing whether she could still make contact. He said he would document this as another violation, and that it showed she was still trying to find ways around the court orders despite agreeing to supervised visits. Detective Shields called me the next morning, and his voice had a different quality to it, more official and determined. He told me he was pursuing a warrant related to Claudia's repeated interference and violations of the court orders. CPS was updating the court on the escalating pattern of her behavior. He explained that the fence incident, combined with the attempted school pickup and the documented nighttime visits, created a clear picture of someone who refused to respect legal boundaries. Having law enforcement actively working to enforce those boundaries made me feel less alone in this fight. I thanked him and hung up, feeling like maybe the system was finally taking this seriously. That evening, I was helping Kia with her bath, pouring water over her hair while she played with rubber ducks and giggled. Terry was in his room doing homework. Ava was supposed to be in her room reading. The bathroom window was cracked open for steam, and I heard it creak wider, but my hands were full of shampoo and Kia's hair. By the time I rinsed Kia off and wrapped her in a towel, something felt wrong. I walked down the hall calling Ava's name. Her bedroom door was open. Her bed was empty. I ran to every room in the house, my heart pounding harder with each empty space. The bathroom window in the hallway was wide open. The screen popped out and lying on the floor. She had climbed out while I was 10 feet away washing her sister. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained that my foster daughter was missing and walking alone through darkness toward a house with a registered sex offender. I gave them the address of the yellow house and described what Ava was wearing. The operator told me to stay home in case Ava returned and that officers were being dispatched immediately. I called Cecilia Klein next, and she answered on the first ring. I told her what happened, and she said she was on her way. Terry came out of his room asking what was wrong, and I tried to keep my voice steady while explaining that Ava had left and the police were looking for her. He looked scared, and I told him to stay with Kia while I waited by the front door. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. My phone rang, and Detective Shields told me they found her about a mile from the yellow house. She was walking alone on the sidewalk in her pajamas and bare feet. They were bringing her home now. I stood on the front porch and watched the squad car pull up. Ava sat in the back seat behind the cage, her small figure looking both defiant and terrified at the same time. Detective Shields helped her out, and she wouldn't look at me as she walked past into the house. He told me that Claudia had been waiting outside the yellow house and was detained for questioning about whether she coordinated this escape attempt. They needed to determine if she had contacted Ava somehow to arrange the meeting. I nodded and thanked him. Inside, Ava sat on the couch with her arms crossed, staring at the floor. Cecilia Klein arrived 15 minutes later and sat down across from Ava. She asked Ava directly if her mother had contacted her or told her to sneak out tonight. Ava shook her head but wouldn't elaborate. Cecilia explained that this was very serious and that there would be a court hearing very soon. The emergency court hearing happened the next afternoon. I sat in a wooden chair in the courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, trying to stay calm. The judge called me to testify first, and I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. I explained everything I had observed and documented over the past several weeks. The nighttime walks, the changed pajamas, the scars, the exhaustion, the window alarms, the fence note, the attempted school pickup, the security camera footage, and now this bathroom window escape. I described following Ava to the yellow house that first night and seeing Claudia with her. I explained about Wesley Lockhart living there and the protection order that prohibited Ava from being at that location. Rachel Walton testified next and provided medical documentation of Ava's injuries and chronic fatigue. She described the concerning pattern of declining alertness at the school and the physical evidence of nighttime activity. Detective Shields presented evidence of Claudia's repeated violations, including the fence approach, the school incident, and her presence outside the yellow house last night waiting for Ava. Danny Herrera spoke last and recommended that Ava remain in my care, but with enhanced safety protocols and continued supervised contact with Claudia under strict conditions. He emphasized that removing Ava from my home would cause additional trauma when the home itself was stable and safe. The judge listened to everything and took notes. Then she started speaking, and my whole body tensed, waiting for her decision. She reviewed all the evidence carefully and made several findings. First, she stated clearly that the abuse allegations against me were completely unfounded, and that investigation was officially closed. Hearing those words lifted a weight off my chest that I didn't fully realize I had been carrying for weeks. I felt tears of relief sliding down my face, and I wiped them away quickly. The judge continued speaking and addressed the situation with Claudia directly. She issued orders for no unsupervised contact with Ava under any circumstances. She extended the protection from abuse order for another year. She mandated that Claudia participate in substance abuse treatment and parenting classes before any contact expansion would even be considered. The judge's tone was firm, but not cruel. She acknowledged that Claudia clearly loved her daughter, but that love did not excuse repeatedly endangering Ava by bringing her to a house with a registered sex offender or encouraging secret nighttime walks through dangerous areas. Claudia had to demonstrate through consistent action over time that she could put Ava's safety ahead of her own desires. Our safety plan got updated right there in the courtroom. Additional window sensors on every bathroom in the house. Increased therapy frequency for Ava to twice per week. A structured schedule of supervised visits contingent on Claudia's compliance with her treatment requirements. Having everything spelled out in an official court order made the boundaries feel more real and enforceable than just CPS recommendations. Then came the placement decision. The judge announced that Ava would remain in my home under close CPS oversight with monthly check-ins and continued guardian ad litem involvement for the next 6 months. I felt overwhelming relief wash through my entire body. Our household could stay intact. Ava wouldn't face another traumatic placement disruption. Terry and Kia wouldn't lose their foster sister. We could keep working on this together. Over the next 2 weeks, our household routines began to stabilize into something that felt more sustainable and less like constant crisis management. I made sure Terry got dedicated homework help time every evening at the kitchen table. Kia maintained her normal bedtime stories and weekend visits to the park. Ava attended therapy twice weekly with Elena Mack, and slowly started adjusting to the reality that nighttime escapes were no longer possible. The bathroom window sensors chirped if anyone even touched them. Ava tested them once, and I was at the bathroom door in seconds. She looked at me with resignation rather than defiance, and went back to her room without argument. Ava's sleep hygiene plan started showing real results after about 10 days of consistent implementation. We established a firm bedtime routine with no screens after dinner, a warm bath, quiet reading time, and a white noise machine running in her room all night. She fell asleep more easily instead of lying awake for hours. She woke less frequently during the night. Her body started remembering how to sleep properly again. Rachel Walton called me 2 weeks after the court hearing to report that Ava's daytime alertness was noticeably improving. She was participating more actively in class activities, and her focus during lessons had gotten much better. The chronic exhaustion was finally lifting now that she was getting actual rest at night, instead of walking 4 miles through darkness. I started using our drives to Elena's office as a chance to talk with Ava about how she was feeling. The car felt like a safer space somehow, with both of us looking forward at the road instead of at each other. During the first few drives, she just stared out the window and gave one-word answers to my questions. But after about 3 weeks of twice-weekly appointments, she started opening up more. One Tuesday afternoon, she told me she was scared her mom would forget about her if they only saw each other for 2 hours every other week. I kept my eyes on the road and told her that moms don't forget their kids, and that her mom was working hard to show she could keep Ava safe. The next Thursday, she got mad and said the visits felt too short, and that having someone watch them the whole time made her feel like she was in trouble. I validated that it probably did feel frustrating and uncomfortable, but explained the rules existed to keep her safe, not to punish her or her mom. She went quiet after that, but I could tell she was thinking about it instead of just shutting down. The next supervised visit happened on a Saturday morning at the same community center. I dropped Ava off and waited in the parking lot like usual, checking my phone every few minutes even though I knew the visit would last exactly 2 hours. When I picked her up, Irene Kelly walked out with her and gave me a small nod that seemed different from the tight expressions I'd gotten used to. She pulled me aside while Ava climbed into the car and told me the visit went really well. Claudia arrived 15 minutes early and seemed calm and focused. She followed all the guidelines without Irene having to redirect her even once. She spent the whole time coloring with Ava and asking about school and her favorite books, normal mom questions instead of trying to get information about our household or make promises about future contact. Irene said she'd note in her report that Claudia demonstrated appropriate boundaries and genuine engagement during the visit. Ava seemed tired but content on the drive home, not angry and confused like she'd been after that first visit. My monthly check-in with Cecilia Klein happened the following Tuesday at the CPS office. I brought my documentation logs like always, but this time Cecilia's whole attitude felt different when I walked into her office. She smiled and asked how I was doing before launching into questions about the kids. We went through the usual updates about school performance, therapy attendance, and household routines, but her tone had shifted from investigative scrutiny to something that felt more like we were working together. Near the end of the meeting, she told me directly that I'd done everything asked of me and more. She said my documentation and cooperation had been essential to keeping Ava safe while maintaining her connection with Claudia. Hearing that acknowledgement after months of feeling like I was constantly being evaluated and judged made my throat tight with relief. She told me we'd continue monthly check-ins for now, but that she was really pleased with how things were progressing. Detective Shields called me that same week to let me know he was closing his active investigation file. He explained that after the court hearing and with no new incidents or contact attempts, there wasn't an active case to investigate anymore. But he told me to call him immediately if there were any new safety concerns, or if Claudia tried to make contact outside the approved channels. Having him available as a resource instead of actively investigating felt like another marker that we were moving from crisis response to ongoing management of a stable situation. The school sent home updated paperwork about Ava's support plan the next week. Rachel Walton had submitted documentation about Ava's improved alertness and engagement in class, and the school counselor recommended continuing the current supports while monitoring her progress. A handwritten note from Rachel fell out when I opened the envelope, saying she was proud of the progress Ava had made in just a few weeks, and that it was clear she was getting the care and stability she needed at home. These small acknowledgments from professionals who saw Ava regularly helped me believe we were actually moving in the right direction, instead of just barely holding things together. Danny Herrera called to let me know he'd submitted his final guardian ad litem report to the court. He told me he was recommending continued placement with me, ongoing trauma therapy with Elena, and structured supervised contact with Claudia that would stay contingent on her treatment compliance. He said his assessment was that Ava was thriving in my home, despite all the challenges, and that the stability I provided was exactly what she needed right now. Reading through the copy of his report that arrived a few days later made me feel like maybe I was actually doing this foster parenting thing right after all, even though most days I still felt like I was making it up as I went along. The review hearing happened on a Wednesday morning 2 months after the initial emergency hearing. I took the day off work and wore the same professional clothes I'd worn to the first hearing. The courtroom felt less terrifying this time, maybe because I knew what to expect, or maybe because I had 2 months of documented progress to present, instead of scrambling to prove I wasn't hurting a child in my care. The judge reviewed all the updated reports from CPS, the guardian ad litem, the therapy provider, and the supervised visitation monitor. She affirmed all the existing safety plans and noted that Claudia had attended 3 substance abuse treatment sessions and enrolled in parenting classes. The judge's tone was cautiously optimistic when she talked about Claudia's early engagement with services, but she emphasized that consistency over time would be necessary before any expansion of contact could be considered. Everything stayed the same for now, which felt like a relief after so much chaos and uncertainty. About a week after the hearing, Cecilia called to tell me that Claudia's attorney had submitted a request asking if Claudia could send Ava cards and small gifts between supervised visits. The court approved it with the rule that everything had to go through me first for screening. I felt nervous about this new form of contact, but understood it was a reasonable way to maintain connection. The first card arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. Inside was a drawing Claudia had made of her and Ava holding hands with a rainbow in the background, and a message written in careful print saying she was working hard every day to be the mom Ava deserved. I showed it to Ava after school and watched her face light up as she traced the drawing with her finger. She carried it to her room and taped it to her wall next to her bed. Ava's therapy sessions with Elena started showing deeper engagement around this same time. Elena told me during one of our brief check-ins that Ava was talking more about her feelings of being pulled between 2 homes and 2 mothers. She was working with Ava on understanding that loving both of us didn't mean she was being disloyal to either one. Elena said this emotional work was hard, but necessary for Ava's long-term well-being, and that Ava was making real progress in processing her loyalty conflicts. I could see the difference at home, too. Small things like Ava asking me questions about her mom without seeming guilty about it, or telling me about therapy without clamming up. One evening after dinner while I was loading the dishwasher, Terry came into the kitchen and told me he was glad Ava seemed happier now. He said our house felt calmer than it had a few months ago, and that he didn't worry as much about what was going to happen next. His observation reminded me that all 3 kids had been affected by the crisis with Ava, and that the return to stability was benefiting everyone in our household. 2 weeks later, I stood in the elementary school gym surrounded by children's artwork taped to every wall, and folding tables covered with clay sculptures and painted rocks. Kia grabbed my hand and pulled me toward her display section near the basketball hoop. Her picture showed 5 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. Each figure had a name written carefully underneath in her wobbly printing. Me, Terry, Ava, Kia, and even our dog Buster, who died before she came to live with us, but she'd seen in photos. I asked her why she drew everyone with such big smiles, and she looked up at me like the answer was obvious. She said she drew us happy because that's how she feels living in our house. Her teacher standing nearby told me Kia talks about our family constantly during free time, and that her ability to find joy despite everything she's been through is remarkable. I thanked the teacher and kept staring at that drawing with its crooked lines and mismatched colors. Something about seeing our household through Kia's eyes made the past few months of stress and fear feel worth it. The supervised visits with Claudia settled into something predictable over the next several weeks. Every other Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, Irene Kelly would meet us at the community center with her clipboard and timer. Claudia arrived on time for each visit wearing clean clothes and bringing small appropriate gifts like coloring books or hair ribbons. She and Ava would sit at one of the plastic tables and color together or play board games while Irene sat in the corner taking notes. Claudia kept her focus on Ava instead of asking inappropriate questions about our household or trying to undermine the placement. She braided Ava's hair and listened to stories about school and helped with homework Ava brought along. The visits lasted exactly 2 hours, and then Claudia would hug Ava goodbye without drama or attempts to extend the time. Ava started looking forward to these Saturdays instead of dreading them. She came home tired from the emotional intensity, but content rather than angry and confused like she'd been before. The structure and consistency seemed to help her understand that loving her mom didn't require dangerous nighttime walks or keeping secrets from me. 3 months after the initial emergency hearing, Cecilia Klein arrived for our scheduled check-in carrying a much thinner folder than usual. We sat at my kitchen table while the kids were at the school, and she reviewed her notes about our household. She told me she was impressed with how the case had moved forward, and that my home was giving Ava exactly the stability and safety she needed. Cecilia said her supervisor agreed that oversight could shift from monthly visits to quarterly check-ins starting next month. This change meant CPS trusted our household enough to step back from constant monitoring. Cecilia emphasized that I should still call immediately if any concerns came up, but that the intensive supervision phase was ending. She asked how I was managing the stress of everything, and I admitted some days felt overwhelming, but that seeing all 3 kids doing better made it worthwhile. Before leaving, Cecilia mentioned that Claudia's compliance with treatment requirements had been consistent so far, and that the court would likely consider that progress at the next review hearing. Detective Shields sent a brief email the following week, confirming there had been no further incidents or violations reported since the emergency hearing. His message stated that from a law enforcement viewpoint, the case remained closed unless new concerns came up. He included his direct phone number and told me to contact him immediately if Claudia attempted any unauthorized contact or if I noticed anything suspicious. Reading that email while sitting at my desk at work made me feel like I could finally relax slightly about the constant watching I'd been doing. The window alarms were still set every night, and I still checked on Ava multiple times, but the fear that Claudia might show up unexpectedly or that something terrible was about to happen started fading. I forwarded the email to Cecilia Klein for her records, and then deleted about 50 other emails I'd been ignoring while dealing with the crisis. Rachel Walton's end-of-semester report arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon in a large manila envelope. I opened it standing in my driveway and read through 3 pages of detailed observations about Ava's progress. Rachel noted that Ava's attendance had been excellent with no unexplained absences. Her academic performance had gone up significantly in both reading and math. Her social interactions with other kids were age-appropriate and positive according to classroom observations. The report included specific examples like Ava volunteering to help a new student find the library, and Ava participating actively in group projects. Rachel's summary paragraph stated that Ava appeared to be thriving, despite the challenges in her personal life, and that the school would continue monitoring her progress. Seeing these concrete measures of how well Ava was doing filled me with something I hadn't felt in months. Not just relief, but actual pride that this kid who'd been walking 4 miles alone through darkness was now succeeding at the school and making friends and acting like a regular 8-year-old. Danny Herrera submitted his final report to the court after 6 months of involvement with our case. He called me first to discuss his recommendations before filing the official paperwork. Danny explained that he was recommending guardian ad litem oversight end because the case had reached a stable point. His report would emphasize that Ava showed secure attachment to me while keeping appropriate connection to Claudia through the supervised visits. He'd observed multiple visits between Ava and Claudia, and interviewed Ava's therapist Elena and her teachers, and reviewed all the documentation from CPS and law enforcement. Danny told me his job was to figure out what served Ava's best interests, and that continuing placement in my home clearly met that standard. He said Ava talked about our household as her safe place, and that she'd made remarkable progress in therapy working through her loyalty conflicts. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time thinking about how much had changed since that first terrifying night when I followed Ava through darkness to the Yellow House. The 6-month review hearing happened on a Wednesday morning in the same courtroom where the emergency hearing had taken place. I took the day off work and wore professional clothes and brought a folder with copies of all the positive reports and documentation. Claudia sat with her attorney looking nervous but put together. The judge reviewed reports from multiple sources including CPS, the supervised visitation monitor, Ava's therapist, and the guardian ad litem. Cecilia Klein testified that Claudia had finished her initial substance abuse treatment program with good reports from the providers. Claudia had also completed the required parenting classes and maintained consistent, appropriate engagement during supervised visits. Elena testified that Ava had made significant progress managing her loyalty conflicts and understanding that the rules existed for her safety. Irene Kelly reported that all supervised visits had gone well with no boundary violations or concerning behavior from Claudia. The judge listened carefully to everything and then announced her decision. She would approve a small expansion of visitation to 3 hours every other week, while keeping the supervision requirement in place. Claudia could also continue sending cards and small gifts through me for screening. The judge told Claudia directly that this progress was encouraging, but that continued compliance over time would be necessary before any further changes. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot after the hearing, and let myself feel everything from the past 6 months at once. The terror of discovering those nighttime walks, and realizing Ava had been going to a house with a registered sex offender. The shame of being investigated for abuse when I'd been trying my best to keep 3 kids safe. The exhaustion of constant documentation and vigilance and coordinating with multiple systems. Now this careful relief of seeing everything settle into something that felt sustainable. This wasn't a perfect ending because Ava still carried trauma that would take years to process, and Claudia still had a long road ahead with treatment and proving consistent safe choices. But we'd built something genuinely safer and more stable than where we started. The nighttime walks had stopped. The supervised visits gave Ava connection to her mom without danger. The support systems were actually working instead of just existing on paper. I started my car and drove home thinking about what I'd make for dinner and whether Terry needed help with his science project. That evening, our house settled into the comfortable routine we'd been building over recent months. Dinner happened at 6 with all 3 kids talking about their days. Terry complained about his English teacher assigning too much reading. Kaya showed me a spelling test with a gold star. Ava talked about her friend Maya's birthday party coming up next weekend. After dinner, we cleared plates together and then spread homework across the kitchen table. I moved between all 3 kids, helping with math problems and vocabulary words, and a geography worksheet. Kaya finished first and asked for her bedtime story. I read her 2 chapters of the book we'd been working through and tucked her in with her favorite stuffed elephant. Ava got ready for bed without being reminded, and fell asleep easily in her room with the window alarm set, but not really needed every single night anymore. The yellow house and its dangers felt further away now. Not because the world had suddenly become safe or because all our problems were solved, but because we'd built structures and supports that actually worked to protect the children in my care. That's everything I had for you today. It's always about the takeaway, not just the words. If it made you think, that's what matters. Subscribe for the next one.